5 minutes ago, a decision made deep inside the royal household shattered the silence surrounding one of Queen Elizabeth's most personal treasures. Princess Anne entered the secure collection vault carrying written authority, reclaimed her late mother's diamond brooch, and ordered that Prince Harry be denied access to it permanently. What appeared to be a dispute over jewelry was, in truth, a devastating declaration about memory, loyalty, and who still belonged within the Queen's trusted circle. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne did not move after the case was opened. The brooch rested before her, but she saw more than diamonds. She remembered the Queen reaching for it before difficult duties, touching the clasp as though steadying herself. This was no ordinary royal jewel. It was a private link to her mother's discipline, sacrifice, and courage. The restricted royal vault, a secure archive where sensitive family jewels and personal objects are protected, had held the peace since the monarch's death. Senior relatives were deciding what would remain sealed, displayed, or passed to descendants. Anne ended that uncertainty with one signature. She reclaimed the brooch and ordered that Harry be denied permission to view it, borrow it, photograph it, or request it again. Her control nearly broke when she removed her gloves and lifted the jewel. Beneath the velvet mount lay a handwritten identification card marked with her mother's initials. Anne stared at it, swallowed hard, and gripped the case. The decision was final, but the grief behind it was not. Harry received the notice alone through a formal palace communication, meaning an official written message issued for the royal household. He read the final sentence twice. He lowered the paper, understanding this was no delay. His aunt had drawn a line between him and one of the last symbols of his grandmother. The request was never casual. Harry wanted access for a private project about Queen Elizabeth's legacy, and Anne feared the brooch could become part of a public story she could no longer control. A senior equerry, a trusted royal aide responsible for personal duties, watched her leave the empty case behind. She carried the brooch into another room, where a member of the family was already waiting to hear why she had acted without warning. But to understand why Anne was prepared to wound her nephew so decisively, the people standing on opposite sides of the vault door must first be understood not as royal titles, but as members of one family still grieving the same woman in painfully different ways. Princess Anne and Prince Harry were not fighting over diamonds. They were fighting over the right to define Queen Elizabeth after her death. For Anne, the brooch represented a mother whose discipline, restraint, and devotion shaped every day of her life. For Harry, it represented a grandmother whose private affection survived even during his deepest separation from the institution. Both believed their connection was genuine. Only one of them now controlled the key. Anne sat alone with the brooch resting on the table before her, yet she could not bring herself to touch it again. She had spent a lifetime following the Queen's example, working without complaint, protecting private pain, and placing duty above personal comfort. To her, guardianship did not mean ownership. It meant accepting the burden of protecting what her mother could no longer defend herself. That was why this moment mattered. The jewel carried memories that could never be separated from the woman who wore it. William entered quietly, and noticed her hands remained folded in her lap. The prince, who stood directly in line to inherit the throne, understood that this was no ordinary family disagreement. Anne admitted in a low voice that denying Harry felt cruel. She knew he had loved their mother in his own way. Yet she also believed that granting access could break a promise made during one of the Queen's final private conversations. William did not interrupt. He simply listened as his aunt confessed that protecting the past sometimes required hurting someone in the present. Harry carried a different memory of the monarch. He remembered private jokes, unexpected telephone calls, and moments when she spoke to him as a grandmother rather than as the head of the royal household. In California, he showed the written refusal to Meghan and paced across the room as anger slowly gave way to humiliation. He had expected resistance from courtiers, senior palace officials who manage royal duties and private arrangements, but he had not expected Anne's signature beneath the final decision. That made the rejection personal. Meghan watched him lower the document and asked whether he would abandon the request. Harry answered immediately. He would not. The brooch was only part of what he had asked to examine. William later revealed through a private recorded conversation with Anne that the application also requested temporary access to archive notes, meaning protected historical records connected to royal objects. Those pages explained when the Queen wore the jewel and why certain appearances mattered to her. Anne feared one detail above all. The notes could expose a final conversation in which her mother warned that private affection must never become public proof of who had been loved most. Then Harry sent a direct message. "You know she would never have shut me out." Anne read it twice, and her silence revealed that those words had wounded her before. That message reopened a wound Anne had been carrying in silence, because the battle had not truly begun at the vault. It began months earlier, during one private ceremony when Harry made a request that changed how his aunt viewed his intentions forever. Months before the vault order, the royal family gathered for a private remembrance service honoring Queen Elizabeth. No cameras entered the chapel. No public statement described what happened afterward, and no one expected confrontation. Yet in a small reception room, beside a table holding the late monarch's personal photographs, Harry approached Anne with a proposal. His words lasted less than 3 minutes. Their consequences would reach all the way into the royal vault. Anne had designed the gathering to protect memory from performance. The private remembrance service, a closed family ceremony held without public attendance or media coverage, brought the Queen's closest relatives together through selected readings, quiet recollections, and personal objects linked to her reign. Harry listened as family members spoke about duty and sacrifice, yet he carried a more private ache. To him, the woman being honored was not only the monarch. She was the grandmother who had laughed with him, called him directly, and offered warmth when the institution around them felt cold. Anne supervised every item placed inside the reception room. She checked the Queen's letters, jewelry records, and handwritten notes herself, ensuring nothing could be copied, photographed, or removed. That protection mattered, because those objects contained details never intended for public debate. They revealed not simply what the monarch owned, but what she feared, valued, and tried to preserve inside a divided family. Harry waited until the ceremony ended. Then he approached his aunt and asked for permission to feature Queen Elizabeth's diamond brooch and its archive history in a filmed tribute about his personal relationship with her. Anne's face changed immediately. She asked whether the project would also discuss the royal family and the painful events surrounding his departure. He answered honestly. He could not promise it would avoid them. The room tightened around that answer. Harry said removing the conflict would make his memories false, because love and pain had existed together. Anne replied that using the Queen's belongings to support his version of events would turn private affection into evidence. She told him the brooch was not proof that one relative had been loved more, understood better, or treated unfairly by everyone else. Then Harry said something he should not have known. He referred to the handwritten note stored beneath the brooch, a document hidden from public records and known only to a tiny circle of relatives and collection staff. Anne stared at him and asked who had revealed it. He refused to answer. Anne reached forward and closed the display case between them. The sound ended the conversation, but it did not end the danger. That same night, she quietly ordered a review of the vault access records, determined to discover who had crossed the line. The review did not merely confirm Anne's suspicions, it identified a chain of private inquiries leading back toward Harry's request, forcing aunt and nephew into the face-to-face confrontation both had tried to avoid. The confrontation took place without cameras, secretaries, or carefully prepared statements. Anne entered a private Windsor sitting room carrying Harry's application in a sealed folder. He was already waiting beside the fireplace, determined to defend his right to remember his grandmother publicly. What followed was not a discussion between a princess and a prince. It was an argument between a grieving daughter and a wounded grandson, each convinced the other was betraying the same woman. Harry had returned briefly to Britain because Anne demanded a direct answer. She wanted to know how he had learned about the hidden note beneath the brooch, and she refused to let another official carry that question for her. The Windsor sitting room had once been used by Queen Elizabeth for private family meetings, moments when the monarch spoke not as head of state, but as mother and grandmother. Anne believed that history might force restraint. Instead, every familiar detail deepened the pain. Anne placed the sealed folder on the table and asked who had disclosed the confidential archive detail. An archive is a protected collection of private records, letters, and official documents preserved for future reference. Harry remained standing. He said he would not expose someone who believed he deserved access to his grandmother's history. His answer was calm, but his jaw tightened as she pushed the folder toward him. Anne accused him of treating family confidence like material that could be negotiated, filmed, and released. Harry fired back that the household had already removed him from the Queen's story, reducing years of affection to silence, because his choices no longer suited the institution. He told his aunt that he was not asking to own the monarch's memory. He was asking not to be erased from it. Harry's voice broke when he said the Queen had been one of the last relatives who called him without an agenda. Anne's anger softened for a single moment. She remembered those calls too. Then she steadied herself and told him that affection did not grant ownership over another person's private words, especially when those words could reopen wounds the monarch had tried to close. Anne opened the folder. The Access Review had uncovered repeated inquiries from an intermediary linked to Harry's production team. An intermediary is someone who acts between two sides without being the final decision-maker. The questions targeted the brooch, the hidden note, and the date of Queen Elizabeth's final instruction. Harry stared at the pages and denied authorizing any of it. Anne studied his face and saw something she had not expected. Genuine shock. Someone on his side had moved ahead without his full knowledge. Yet even that revelation was not enough to change her decision. Harry's denial complicated the conflict, but it did not reverse Anne's decision, because the ultimate power over the brooch rested not with emotion alone, but with a tightly controlled system of royal authority that had already begun closing ranks around her. Royal power rarely arrives with raised voices. Sometimes it appears as a single sheet of paper placed beneath a silver pen. After Anne's confrontation with Harry, the brooch's future moved into a private process involving inheritance instructions, collection protocols, and the wishes Queen Elizabeth left behind. Yet the most important moment belonged to King Charles, who sat alone with the file and understood that approving Anne's action could deepen a fracture he had failed to heal. Charles read every page slowly. Queen Elizabeth's personal jewellery stood between family inheritance, royal stewardship, and historic preservation. Royal stewardship means protecting objects on behalf of the monarchy rather than treating them as ordinary private possessions. That distinction mattered because access could be restricted even to close relatives when privacy, history, or the dignity of the crown was at risk. The brooch carried all three burdens. Anne held practical authority because the Queen had trusted her to review several personal objects after her death. She knew which pieces held private meaning, which records had to remain sealed, and which memories could survive public attention. Yet her decision could still be challenged through another household channel, unless the king approved it. Charles understood that one signature would not merely support his sister, it would close every remaining route Harry might use. The monarch removed his glasses and looked toward an old photograph of his mother. Harry's request lay on one side of the desk. Anne's objections rested on the other. Charles placed his hand over the unsigned authorization and said nothing. Denying his son would look like another rejection from a family already accused of shutting him out. Overruling his sister would humiliate the woman who had stood beside their mother through her final duties. William entered without advisors and closed the door behind him. The prince warned his father not to treat the matter as punishment. He argued that the brooch had to be protected because of the confidential note, not because Harry no longer served as a working royal. A working royal is a family member who officially represents the monarch through public duties. Charles listened because that difference could decide whether the order appeared protective or vindictive. The file contained one final revelation. Queen Elizabeth had left a written instruction stating that the brooch should remain with the family member most capable of protecting its personal meaning from public dispute. No name appeared, but Anne believed the words pointed directly to her. She had guarded the Queen in life. Now she believed she had been asked to guard what remained. Charles lifted the silver pen and signed. Harry's denial became final. Before the ink had dried, an aide entered with urgent news. Details of the vault dispute had reached a newspaper editor. The signature ended Harry's formal access, but the leak transformed a private family boundary into a public royal crisis, and the first consequences would strike before any of them had time to prepare an explanation. By morning, the brooch was no longer hidden inside a private case. Its name appeared in urgent calls between palace offices, legal advisors, and family members demanding to know how the dispute escaped Windsor. Harry learned that his denial had leaked when his phone filled with messages asking whether Anne had personally barred him from Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Anne learned moments later, and her reaction was not anger. It was the cold realization that someone wanted this wound exposed. Palace communications staff moved quickly, but every possible response carried danger. A communications office is the team responsible for handling official statements and protecting the monarchy's public message. Confirming too much could expose the confidential archive note. Saying too little could make the household look cruel and evasive. Charles's newly signed authority also had to remain hidden, because revealing it would turn a private family decision into a direct act by the king. The leak split the story in two. Anne was either the loyal daughter protecting her mother's privacy, or the powerful aunt shutting an estranged nephew out of the Queen's memory. Harry saw the second version first. He stood at a kitchen counter, reading a headline that declared he had been denied even a glimpse of his grandmother's jewel. He pushed the phone away, then reached for it again moments later. The words felt impossible to ignore. Meghan urged him not to respond while anger controlled him. She reminded him that any statement released in fury would become permanent. Harry said silence would allow the palace to portray him as a man trying to exploit the Queen, when his tribute had begun as an attempt to preserve the grandmother he remembered. Meghan listened, but she saw humiliation beneath his rage. He was not only defending a project, he was defending his place in the family story. Anne received a call from Zara minutes later. Her daughter asked whether she was all right, and whether the reports were true. Anne answered calmly, saying the brooch was secure and the decision remained unchanged. Yet after the call ended, she closed the door, sat alone, and pressed the Queen's identification card between both hands. Zara had heard control in her mother's voice. She had not heard the grief. Security staff soon delivered the first hard revelation. The leak had not come from the vault team or Anne's office. It came from someone who knew both Harry's original request and Charles's final signature, narrowing the source to a dangerously small circle. William then learned that Harry had drafted a public statement naming the brooch and defending his intentions. Before it could be released, he contacted his brother directly and asked for one private conversation, without lawyers, aides, or prepared language. For the first time since the dispute began, the next move would not belong to Anne, Charles, or the palace machine. It would depend on whether William and Harry could speak as family before one public statement made reconciliation impossible. William did not call to defend the palace. He called because he knew what the brooch meant before it became a headline. With no advisors listening, the brothers spoke about their grandmother, their childhood, and the final years that had placed them on opposite sides of almost every royal decision. The conversation began with accusation. It changed when William revealed why Anne feared the hidden note, and what Queen Elizabeth had written about protecting love from becoming a weapon. William asked Harry to delay his public statement for 1 hour. Harry agreed only after demanding complete privacy. No summary would be passed to the palace communications staff, the team responsible for shaping the monarchy's public response. No aide would turn their pain into prepared language. That condition mattered because both brothers understood the dispute had grown far beyond one jewel. It was now a struggle over whether the Queen's memory would be divided into rival stories, each using her affection to prove who had been wronged. Harry accused the household of protecting its image, while ignoring what the rejection had done to him. William did not argue. Instead, the prince read aloud a permitted summary of the handwritten note kept beneath the brooch. The Queen had written that affection inside the family should never be displayed as proof that one person had been loved more faithfully than another. Her private love, the note warned, must never become a weapon in a public dispute. Harry fell silent. He had wanted the brooch included in a tribute because it carried memories of his grandmother's warmth, humor, and quiet support. Yet he now saw the danger. Even with sincere intentions, placing the jewel inside his personal account could make it appear that the monarch's affection was being used to defend his choices and challenge the family he had left behind. William admitted Anne's method had been harsh. He said the denial should have been explained by someone who understood the pain behind it, not delivered through formal language cold enough to feel like punishment. Harry answered that every official letter felt like another door closing, while the people behind it refused to look him in the eye. The future king heard the exhaustion beneath those words, and for once, he did not try to correct them. Harry agreed not to release the statement and not to pursue access to the brooch. In return, William promised to tell Anne directly that his brother had never authorized the secret inquiries made by the intermediary. When the call ended, Harry deleted the draft. William then entered his aunt's room alone. He told Anne that protecting the Queen's memory now required one final act, not another restriction, but a gesture proving the decision had been about privacy rather than revenge. Anne had secured the brooch, and Harry had withdrawn his demand. But the monarchy still faced the public story already raging beyond the palace walls, where one unforgettable image would decide how the nation understood the conflict. The private compromise arrived too late to stop the world from choosing sides. By midday, broadcasters debated whether Anne had defended Queen Elizabeth or erased Harry from her legacy. Newspapers transformed a family wound into a national argument about duty, inheritance, and belonging. Then one front page appeared outside Buckingham Palace, showing the brooch beside two photographs: Anne walking behind her mother's coffin, and Harry bowing his head at the funeral. And the public reaction changed instantly. Harry's exclusion dominated the first reports. Commentators repeated that he had been denied not only permission to borrow the brooch, but also access to the private historical records connected to it. Those records formed part of the Royal Archive, a protected collection of letters, notes, and documents preserved because they carry personal and national importance. The restriction sounded severe because it touched both his family bond and his place in the Queen's story. Palace officials released a restrained statement confirming that personal items linked to the late monarch were managed according to her wishes. The statement added that such objects were protected from unauthorized commercial or documentary use. It did not name Harry, Anne, or the hidden note, but the silence around those details created even more tension. Every missing word invited another accusation. Outside Buckingham Palace, a newspaper vendor raised a front page carrying the headline, "A Daughter Guards the Queen's Final Secret." Anne and Harry appeared on opposite sides of the diamond brooch, turning private grief into one unforgettable symbol. A crowd gathered near the palace railings. Some praised the princess for defending her mother's privacy. Others argued that the Duke had already lost enough and should not be denied one more connection to his grandmother. Then an elderly woman stepped forward and placed flowers beneath a photograph of Queen Elizabeth. Her voice carried over the debate. She loved them both. That is what they must remember. The crowd fell quieter, because the sentence cut through every title, rule, and accusation. Anne watched the coverage from a private room with Zara beside her. Her face tightened when one commentator described the restriction as revenge. Zara said nothing. She simply reached across and held her mother's hand. Anne did not pull away. William then authorized confirmation through a documented palace briefing that Harry had voluntarily withdrawn his request after learning more about the Queen's privacy instructions. The revelation changed the tone. What had looked like pure punishment now appeared to be a painful compromise. Anne made her final decision that same afternoon. The brooch would not vanish into another locked case. She began preparing an arrangement that would honor the Queen, protect the handwritten note, and recognize Harry's bond without granting the access she had denied. The public argument began to soften, but only Anne's final decision could determine whether the diamond brooch would remain a symbol of exclusion or become the last lesson Queen Elizabeth left for a divided family. Anne did not return the brooch to darkness, and she did not surrender it to family conflict. 3 days after reclaiming it, she carried the jewel into a private gathering, attended by Charles, William, Zara, and a small number of trusted relatives. Harry joined by secure call. No press statement had been prepared. No cameras recorded what followed. Anne placed the brooch at the center of the table and finally explained what her decision had always meant. Charles watched in silence as his sister announced that the jewel would enter a protected rotating display dedicated to Queen Elizabeth's lifelong service. A rotating display is a carefully managed public exhibition in which historic objects appear for limited periods before returning to secure storage. The public would be allowed to see the brooch, but the handwritten note beneath it would remain permanently sealed inside the family archive. William understood why that mattered. The jewel could be shared, but the Queen's most private words would not become material for argument. Anne made the restriction equal. No individual royal could use the piece for a personal project, private claim, or competing version of the monarch's affection. The rule applied to her, Harry, William, Zara, and every other descendant. Charles gave a slow nod. For the first time, the king could see that his sister had not taken control for herself. She had removed control from everyone. Anne turned toward the secure screen carrying Harry's image. She told him directly that she had never denied his place as a grandson. She had denied every member of the family the right to turn their mother and grandmother into evidence. Harry listened without interrupting. Then he admitted that the formal rejection had made him feel erased, as though the family had closed another door without allowing him to speak. Harry also accepted the truth he had resisted. Once he understood the message inside the Queen's note, withdrawing the request had become necessary. Using the brooch, even with love behind it, could have made private affection look like proof in a public dispute. Anne did not apologize for protecting the jewel. She apologized for allowing procedure to deliver a deeply personal decision. Harry accepted that apology, and the tension in the room finally broke. William then read the inscription approved by the family. The brooch would represent Queen Elizabeth's service and the private love she gave equally, without allowing it to become a source of competition. The conflict ended there. Harry received no private access. Anne kept no personal ownership. The brooch returned to public duty under the same restriction for everyone. And so the vault closed without hiding the truth. Princess Anne had not reclaimed a diamond to defeat Harry, but to stop grief from becoming possession, leaving the monarchy with one final, unmistakable verdict, that Queen Elizabeth's love could be remembered, honored, and shared, but never owned. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.